Hello, well today I'm going to look at the Phillips CDI 350. This is one I purchased not that long ago. Had major problems this system, dead screen, no audio, backlight crap, CD wasn't spinning, it wouldn't keep the time and date, and the CD drive itself was snapped off. Now looking at the side of the unit, we've got a CD eject, a volume control, phono input, game controller input, output video, output audio, output audio again and video, turn the display on and off, brightness control, NTSC and PAL, and a little hidden input output jack on the side. Not much else on the other side of the machine. On the back of the machine where the screen flips up, that's where the optional digital video cartridge goes, so you can watch movies. This machine wasn't obviously equipped with that. That's what the machine would look like if you had the digital video adapter on. This is the system that I've particularly got. The system was mainly used more of a commercial system. As you can see, there's not a lot on it. On-off buttons and switches, the main CD controls, the controller pad, and your main button. So the pretty simple basic operation of this. It was meant to be a point of sale material really for sort of like car salesman or carpet salesman, that sort of thing. So let's get stripping. So under all these screws on the base of the unit and these two screws on the side, and once those panels are off, it pretty much hinges up and you can get the motherboard out fairly easy. It's quite an easy system to work on. So where do we start? So first things first, we've got to recap it. The main problem with these particular machines is the caps are crap. They just leak everywhere, and this one was no different. There was loads of capacitor juice all over the plate. The way I remove caps is I cut with a nice sharp pair of side cutters in parallel with the terminals. So whichever way the terminals are facing, I cut parallel. I feel that puts minimal pressure on the pads and gives you can get them off nice and cleanly. Once you get the main body of the cap off, this little sort of like coaster thing that's on the base of the cap is left behind. Just gently snap that in half and pick that off. Once that's off, you're usually left with just the two remaining pads, which you can nice and easily remove with your soldering iron. Get those little legs out the way, and that'll leave some ancient solder on there. So what we need to do is go with a bit of solder wick and just a little bit of flux on there, and just soak up all that old solder. It's going to be manky. It's been on there like 20-30 years, so let's put some fresh on. So again, here's me just doing a different section, a different angle, same principle. Just cut the caps off, cut the main body of the cap off. If you've got the room and there's not too many components, some people use hot air. I like this because it's very direct. I've had very little pad damage, which can be a major issue with a lot of things. You can be nice and gentle and snip away very gently, and you can extract the caps with minimal damage, because that's what the object of this exercise is to get all those caps off with the minimum amount of damage to the pads, because that just causes you hard work and arseache. This instance I was really lucky. I didn't have any pad damage. Everything extracted lovely, even though there was a considerable amount of residue from the electrolyte inside the capacitors. There was a lot of that on the board. There was some through hole damage, which I did repair. So I was really lucky in that respect that everything came away really well. Now, with most of these systems now reaching this sort of age, it is something that you need to take your time and really work your way through this in a process. There's too many capacitors to rush. A Game Gear or something like that, easy peasy, but this is a time consuming mental nightmare. It really can get you, and you're better off doing it so many a day. That's what I tend to do, is I probably remove 10 or 15 capacitors a day. And it just breaks it up and it stops it being real, because nobody really wants to be doing this. It's a right ball ache. It's not a nice job to do. So I do a little bit at a time. That's why it can take weeks to obviously get these systems back up and running, purely because I don't want to sit there for 3 or 4 hours literally back breaking out and bending over doing this. It's meant to be enjoyable. So that's the technique I use, and so far so good. It's given me good results. So once the board is removed of caps and everything, and if there are any board repairs, then fair enough. I recently recapped my PC Engine GT, and there was a lot of capacitor damage on that, a lot of pad damage, should I say, and that took a long while to get right. So once you've got all the caps off, you're left with hopefully left with a nice clean board. In this instance, the pads were all pretty good, so some nice new fresh flux and some nice new fresh solder onto the pads. Make sure that it adheres well, because obviously you want them to stick down. I tend to use the seesaw technique. Some people use hot air. It's personal choice, whatever works for you, really. I use the seesaw technique, which is basically you solder one side of the capacitor on, and then you gently apply pressure to the actual top of the capacitor, and then apply heat to the other side, and then you seesaw from one side to the other and gradually work the capacitor down onto its obviously flat bed. Once I'm satisfied that it's soldered on correctly, I then apply a little bit more flux and just reheat the solder pads to make sure that everything's nice and shiny. You've got no dull solder joints and everything's that. And then once you finish, clean it off with some IPA just to get rid of any excess flux, and that will be great. That's that job done. Once the capacitor's on, I do go around each capacitor with a ohm meter just to make sure none of them have shorted, because sometimes you can't get the exact size capacitor, and it can bridge. If you're not careful, you can bridge a contact, and you can just basically create a short. So I always go around when I'm finished and just double check. So now we're moving on to the Timekeeper. The Timekeeper is what saves the date and time of the system. It's in the form of this particular chip on this particular system. A lot of systems just use a battery separate. This generation of console decided that they were going to marry it all into this chip, as you can see on there. Really much, you can see why they moved away from this idea. There is actually a coin cell battery inside this chip, which again, probably for ease of manufacture, it was probably a good idea at the time, but obviously now it's a complete ball ache. So I've got some new old stock chips. I've been assured that they worked. We'll come to that a bit later on, but I probably should have socketed this, but I was worried that it would sit too high, because obviously in this little portable, height and room is at a premium. I've recently changed the Timekeeper on one of my other CDIs, and there was bags of room, so obviously I had the bonus of being able to socket it that, so that if that chip ever went in the future, obviously it would be very easy to take in and out and change. This isn't for everybody. There are modifications which I'll show you later on in this video. I wanted to do it properly. I wanted a nice new Timekeeper, and I wanted it all to be nice and genuine and all lovely. So how wrong was I? But anyway, at this particular time, I'm soldering in obviously what I think is a new Timekeeper and a working Timekeeper. Nothing particularly difficult with this. It just used a solder extractor just to clear all the holes, removed the old Timekeeper, just making sure the orientation, because obviously it needs to be the right way around. Pin 1 is clearly identified. Once I'd got the Timekeeper soldered in, it's then move on to the next problem. Again, this machine has had a very hard life. There's not many of them in very good condition, because they were, I think, mainly used for industrial use. They suffered. They're not home consoles, they're not been loved or sat in a living room for most of their life. This has been out on the road, so unfortunately you will find very few of them that are in nice condition, B, that work, because like you say, the capacitors and all the rest of it, and the lasers as well, are not standing the test of time. I think the CDI is probably a system that's well overdue an ODE replacement, but I don't know, it's probably an unpopular system, that's probably why. So all the feet had snapped off this bottom tray which supports the CD drive carrier, so I 3D printed myself some little standoffs, and just obviously what I'm going to do is I'm grinding off the remnants of the old posts with this little grinder, just so that I've got a nice clean fresh plastic base to glue my new posts to. So I'll get these ground off, and what I did, I fitted the screws into the CD drive, basically for orientation purposes. I then eyed up where it needed to be. I outlined and marked the plastics, basically so that when I apply the glue, I hopefully know where it's going to be in the right place. So this is some glue that I use for work, actually. Use it for fixing bumpers and headlights and things. It's a 2-pack, like a resin gun. Sets almost like plastic, very good adhesion properties. So basically what I've done, I've stuck 2 on already. Now I'm just lining up, making sure everything's in the right orientation. The biggest reason for this is that these little standoffs go through the motherboard, because the motherboard goes on first, and then this CD drive then mounts to where it is, sandwiched obviously between the motherboard. Cracker's idea, I know, but there you go. So get all those stuck down. Once those, it takes about 10 minutes really to really dry out, for this to really set hard like plastic. It's usable in minutes. It does go off pretty damn quick, but it's, to make sure that it's really nicely got it, I want to leave it. So I unscrewed them. There's the posts all glued in, and they are pretty sturdy. Now you'd have to really hang on these to break them off. The glue really does take well. It is a fantastic glue because it is meant for automotive. So there's the motherboard back on, just to make sure that I have got these standoffs in the right place. Pop the motherboard back out, and there's a couple of other broken bits. These are the screw holes that support the motherboard, that actually hold the motherboard onto this plate. Now it looks metal, but like I say, all that entire lower bottom half is plastic. So I'm just grinding off the plastic, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut the bottom off the standoffs that I've made, just so basically it's like a tube. And then I'm going to, there's me cutting it off there. I'm just going to then run this little drill through it, because I wanted the hole to be slightly bigger because of these slightly different screws. So basically I'm just running the drill up the centre of this, just to basically open the hole out a little bit. There's already a hole there that I 3D printed into it, but 3D printers are not perfect, so just wanted to run that up there so it would be easier for me to start the screws when I come to reassemble. So just getting it nicely fine-tuned, just so that it sits in that corner. Super glue it in first. I'm just going to put a screw into it just so I could easily hold it, and then like you say, I was going to super glue it down, and then once it's in position, the beauty of super glue is it's obviously instantaneous. So a little bit of super glue, then a little bit of a hardener just to get the super glue to go off quickly. Then once that's in place, I'm going to go round it with the 2-pack glue to make sure that it's properly reinforced, and there's a good nice bond there and a nice strong joint to support the motherboard. So the super glue's set, and I'm just going to go around now with the epoxy. Each time you use that sort of stuff, you have to put a new straw on it, that yellow bit. The glue obviously sets, that tube is actually a mixing tube for the glue. It comes out as 2 different products, and then it mixes in the tube as it goes down the nozzle. So just putting a nice generous amount there just to reinforce that boss. But it is super glued down, so it's not going to wander around, or that's why you super glue it first, just to hold it in place while you then fit the rest of the glue around it. Okay, with that all done, that's going to be good. That's pretty much the base finished and sorted, so they can see they're all glued in. And the standoffs are all there, so we're pretty much ready to put the motherboard back in really. But I noticed that the CD drive wasn't spinning. The spindle cap, if you want to call it, the bit that the CD actually sits on, wasn't spinning, and it had been pushed into the actual base. So I couldn't see any way other than literally getting something underneath it and levering it up. But you've got to be careful, obviously, because of the height of the spindle is important, because of the lens focusing on the laser. So I did mess around for quite a while until I was happy that I'd got it in the right position and it spun freely, and I felt that it was in its best position for it, giving it a chance to actually work. So we'll see later on whether that actually works or not. These CD drives are quite hard to come by. I can see many of the CDI lasers on eBay and AliExpress and stuff like that, but this particular design seems to be quite hard to come by. So popping the motherboard back in, it is quite fiddly. It only goes in very tightly, and there's this little felt pad. I think it's when you look down into the CD tray. I don't know if it's to try and keep the muck off the motherboard, or whether it's just to stop you looking directly at the motherboard, just so it looks a bit prettier, I don't know. So we'll get the CD unit back on. A little bit fiddly, but nothing too difficult. With that in place, just get it screwed. It's got the 4 screws to hold it down on those new little bosses that I've made. So I'm not going to go berserk on them, just gently screw those into place. One goes through like an earthing strap. You don't want to forget that. Okay, so that's all pretty much nice and neat there. Get all that connected back up. There's just a ribbon cable and a power cable for the motor. The rest of it, obviously the control and that, is all on board the actual CDI unit motherboard itself. There we go, that's sorted. I put all the system back together and it wouldn't keep the time and date, so this is basically the Timekeeper mod. You grind the end of the chip back until you can see the battery. The red lead is the positive, the green lead is the negative, which goes to that CR2032 coin cell battery. So you grind out the end of the chip back, and you come across the 2 terminals that the internal coin cell goes to, and you can solder to those. And obviously you can see from there I've soldered 2 wires to the so what I'm doing now is I'm potting it, what we call potting. So basically to prevent any corrosion or anything shorting, I'm using that resin again, that 2-pack, to basically pot it so that the wires aren't going to be wiggled around or snapped, and it just keeps it nice and neat. I found that was the best design to place the coin cell. So we'll see if that works a bit later on, but I had to take it all to bits, obviously, to take it outside and grind. I left the chip in situ. I didn't want to, because you couldn't, it isn't socketed, it made it a ball ache, so I just took the motherboard outside and just used a little die grinder and ground down until I come across the terminals. I didn't clean it up too hastily or mad, just enough to get to the terminal, solder those 2 wires on, pot it, double-sided taped that coin cell holder to the one of the RAM chips. Get it all back together, pop the CD drive back in, and we're all back up and running again. So there's no reason why this mod won't work. It's quite a well documented mod. People do it differently, again depending on how much room you've got, how accessible you want the coin cell. The coin cell that was in that Timekeeper chip was minute, so the chip, the coin cell battery that I fitted here will last, Christ, probably 30-40 years, I should think, the size of it in comparison to the battery that was already there. Be interesting. I have no idea how long it would, but it must last a long while, just considering the size difference there. So I don't think I've got anything to worry about or changing that in the near future. Just tidying up some wires here. There was originally some cloth tape over this chip, so I'm just going to mimic that. I've got a bit of cloth. Rather than using like insulation tape or hot glue, I'm going to use what was there before, which is a felt, just what we call loom tape in the automotive industry. Just a bit of loom tape there, just to hold those wires intact, stop them flapping around. I don't think they'd go anywhere anyway, but it's just nice to keep everything nice and neat and make it all look as neat and nice as possible. So that's the motherboard basically finished. So just going to pop the side on. So it's like a clamshell sort of design, putting it back together. That's the front speaker and the front IR sensor. Then we've got the button control. That's the button control ribbon. That's a slightly smaller one. And then there is obviously the bigger one, which is I think that's for the screen, that one, the slightly bigger one. they've been in and out quite a few times. So I was quite wary that the actual socket was starting to, bits of plastic were starting to come off the socket, and it weren't working. It wasn't clamping down as nicely, but it's good enough. Once it's in place, it's sturdy. It doesn't need a blob of hot glue or anything like that to keep it in place. But I have had those ribbon connections off too many times. So click it shut, the clamshell, turn it over, and then it slots into place. Once the ports are in, it's all slotted into place. Just really a reverse of putting it to taking it apart. It's just 4 screws, 1 in each corner, 1 in the very centre, and then there are 2 screws on the side of the unit where the ports are. So soon get these popped in, and it'll be test time. As I said before, this little blanking plate that I'm just screwing on now is where the digital video cartridge add-on would have, like the interface would have clicked into here. So you'd have took this off and fitted the extension unit that goes on the base, which adds the digital video cartridge that will allow you to watch video CDs or CDI films and stuff like that. There are systems about with that on it. I suppose it was down to what your system was going to be doing, because the CDI could run basic video playback without the digital video cartridge, but like I say, some things did. I'm surprised that all of these systems didn't have that digital video cartridge as standard, but obviously this one didn't. So just popping those 2 screws in the side there. They are a different type, so they are much more a machine screw, so you can it all sits nice and flush in the side of the unit. I do like this unit, but again, I wish an ODE, some sort of universal ODE for the CDIs would be on the horizon. I have a lot of CDI machines that I am going to cover in the next few months. Actually, there are quite a few different CDI players. I started with this one purely and simply because I'd spent so much time. That's the coin cell that was in the Timekeeper, and that's the Timekeeper I was having to play with. You can see the battery actually just becoming visible on there. So there's lots of different models. There are much more compact versions of this. Okay, this was the industrial version. This is the version that obviously, like I said, was a workhorse rather than an entertainment system. Well, there we go. Perfect, nicely bright screen. No shadowing or ghosting that you seem to get when we have bad capacitors. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to input the date and time. So what I want to do is check that Timekeeper is actually working. If that battery is not connected properly, or the Timekeeper itself is dead, when we disconnect the power from the system and leave it for 5 minutes and come back to it, the clock will have reset to 0 again. So I'm going to reset, obviously, the time and date. I'm using the controls actually on the top of the unit rather than the remote control. Haven't got used to writing 2023 yet. So just having a play with this. None of them before. Every time you came out of this, literally every time you came out of this screen, even with the DC power jack connected, it would not save this. As soon as you come out, it would literally go back to 0. Everything would go back to how it was, like a factory default. Right, so that's it set. That just dims the display out. Maybe if you're using an external display or anything like that. Some of your obviously saved games and bits and bobs could be stored in there. So pretty basic. So I've just disconnected the power. I'd left it, reconnected the power. Brilliant. It saves. So the Timekeeper mod did work actually perfectly. So I'm really pleased with that. That's even though I bought 2 duds, it's nice to see that it actually worked. So this is it. This is the CDI 350, all working, back and restored, good as new. It's not perfect. It's got some marks on it, but I'm really pleased. Just by that hinge usually breaks. There was a few bits and bobs that I did, but I'm really pleased that it's gone back together and it's a functioning unit again. So really pleased. That's the bag that it would come by. You know, when you obviously, as a salesman, you would have that sort of thing in your disposal. So really pleased with that. So if you've made it this far, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye for now.